let's start setting everything up then. Let's get everyone in from the hated Discord. Right. Okay, that's everything sorted. If you're here, folks, say hi. Do say hi while I have a quick beverage. Hey, Mark, how you doing? Hey, Bomatron. Battle Whisk with the Alice salute. Love to see it. Okay. He is quite annoyed. I'm like... The mug kind of sums up my feeling about this book. Because on the one hand, like, it's not the worst book I've ever read for this stream. On the other, it does have some pretty annoying bouts of lib brain that I can't really get over. Because it seems like all of these people believe in a UK that's never actually existed, which I find really strange. But, you know, we'll find out. We'll see what you all think of it in a bit. Also, high-end participation. How you doing? How is everyone this evening? How's everyone's Saturday been? Hope you've all been keeping well. Incidentally, since this is a single solo book review, You Can Play drops at me. So do that if there's any uncomfortable silences or I fumble around with the book as usual. Ooh, nice. Chicken wings. I could go for chicken wings. I can't really have them because my partner hates them. And so, can't really have the chicken wings these days. Hey, Mr. Gump raiding with a party of 3. In that gif, it looks like a lot more than 3, but trust me, that's 3 people. That is exactly... Mr. Gump, did you manage to defeat the hated father figure? Also, if you all want to do me a favor, you should go follow Mr. Gump right now. Just click on his name and do it. Yeah, just go figure out how to do it. Go follow him right now. Okay, so has anyone in the chat read this book? So, just so that no one spoils the book. But it is a mixed bag for sure. It's not my favorite book. Let's put it like that. It's not my favorite book. I won't be reading it again, I don't think. But it is at least well written and, you know, actually attempting to target someone who deserves it for once, which is a rarity among British political books, which mostly seem to be about, I want to punch down on someone. But this is not that necessarily. And chapter 1, fantastically called An Introduction to Political Lying, as if you live in the UK, you need an introduction to that. But we go. And this is the first book I've read in a long time where a joke lands. So I'm gonna read the first 2 paragraphs of this for you all, and you can see why I'm so relieved at the quality of the joke or the comment here. You're looking to hire a new member of staff. A candidate presents himself. He's charming, intelligent, amusing, well-connected, with glowing references, but a check throws up uncomfortable facts. He was sacked from his first job after university for lying. He was sacked again after a similar episode later on in his career. Close inspection reveals that he has a history of deception, misrepresentation, false statements, and serial fabrication. You'd probably be more likely to call the police than hire this individual, and yet, on the 12th of December 2019, the British people elected Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. Fucking a relief that someone has actually managed to write something relatively funny in an actual thing. stealing a bit from my NIP video, admittedly. Peter Oborne, no, he didn't do that. But there is a similar bit in my YouTube video. May have been inspired partially by the fantastic comment here. He used to work with him as well. He mentions that. That is mentioned in the book. He mentions. In fact, he not only worked with him, he was hired by him. Yeah, he actually managed to stay on topic to the end of the joke. Yeah, I mean, fair play. Peter Oborne, show yourself, coward. Join me in the debate dojo. Anyway, he opened strong. It was the other way around. Oborne was hired by Johnson because he was the editor. It's explained later. We'll get to that all later. If a big part of this book is him like trying to reconcile the Boris Johnson he worked for with the Boris Johnson of today, and I really want to be like, he was the same dude. Come on, like we don't need to speculate about what changed him. It was always the same person. Like you just weren't outside of the club at that point, which again is something he talks about. He asks us some interesting questions here. What led the British people to put a liar into Downing Street? Again, always an interesting question. And what made the Conservative Party, which has played such a famous role in British history, I mean, that's one way of putting it, install him as leader? And my answer, Peter Oborne, I have the answer, you'll be glad to know, it's because the Conservative Party are lying liars who lie on behalf of their class interest. It's not some great mystery. The Conservative Party was not this beloved and benevolent organisation, and then suddenly it became bad. And this is a recurring problem, which is that Peter Oborne seems to think that versions of these things existed that never actually existed. Literally none of us. No one reasonable will believe that these things existed in any other form. Anyway, this is going to make me go mad. The early bits are a bit bad. So it's not long since Britain was famed for both public and private probity. Liars were shunned in private and public life. I'm sorry, but like, I hate to just sort of, I'm going to need a lot more to go off. I'm going to need a lot more in the way of like citation needed here. Because like, he's again talking about something that has never existed. Britain was never a country where that was the case. Tony Blair, famous not liar. Tony Blair is actually one of the people he blames for this problem. But it's not like we didn't have like sleaze-ridden governments before. In fact, he specifically mentions a bit of like sleaze and deception done by the Thatcher government and doesn't quite connect the dots. But we'll get to that. His election as Prime Minister suggests that British people no longer care about the difference between fact and fiction, or truth and falsehood. What kind of society have we become? And my answer again, Peter Oborne, I'm answering all your questions before you even get into the main bit of the book. The answer is, it's the society we have always been. We've always been that society. I hate to tell you it. I hate to be the one to tell you it. It's worth noting here that Peter Oborne is not like a left-wing commentator. He's not a socialist. He's nothing like that. He is like a bog-standard One Nation Tory. And he is, he's demonstrating it here. I think Blair is perhaps the worst for better or worse. I think, oh no. Winston Churchill, famously not a lying chancellor. Yeah, well, in fact, he makes points about this. He actually himself makes these points, but then fails to connect the dots appropriately, which is frustrating. A big part of my notes in this book are basically yes and, because he'll make a largely correct observation and then decline to continue talking about it. He doesn't want to continue at all with any of the quite decent insights he has. It's really, really frustrating. Okay, so he writes here, there was a time before the emergence of political parties as we know them today, when it was normal for ministers to lie, cheat, and bribe. And my question here is like, so why do we believe that it would be different now? Like, what, why would political parties existing change that dynamic? And why then should we be surprised that this is a norm that's embedded and re-emerging? more prominently. I just don't see why it's something like, oh, did you know it used to be like this? I'm like, yes, it's always been like this. It's always been like this. The UK has always been like this. Like, I don't know what this guy imagined the UK as. And he makes the point here, ministers did not want voters or rival politicians, this is because they didn't used to do, like, you know, budgets or whatever, to know how government money was being spent, so there was limited accountability and often zero integrity in public administration. Again, I don't see why, given that history, we should believe Boris Johnson is an aberration in the UK context. What fundamentally changed? Because the way he describes the changes that happen, he's acting like minor administrative changes are massive revolutionary breaks with the past, which they're just not. And so the following paragraph wound me up. In chapter 3, I will show how morality changed in public life. Our Victorian ancestors, many inspired by evangelical Christianity, famously an unproblematic thing to be inspired by, erected a series of protections against deceit and corruption. It is fashionable to mock them today, which we should. But the Victorians brought high ideals into government which changed the way that Britain was ruled. They introduced accountability and integrity in the process, creating the modern British state. I hate to be this guy again, but I don't think Peter Oborne has his history strictly correct. Did the Victorians perhaps do anything else to help them build that state? Who can say? No one can say. No one knows how the Victorians marshalled the resources to do that. There were famously no resistances to any of these changes. Chartists didn't exist. Nothing. Famously fine. Britain's colonies famously unimpeachable. Very well administered. Nothing bad happened there. Again, who can say? A whole lot of Peter Oborne being like, who could possibly say how some of these things happened? Again, this is more of a yes and than a I think, because if he inspected, I suspect if he actually inspected this a bit more closely, he might not have written it like this. And he talks about what happened, what used to happen, which is that under the Victorian system, back in the olden days, ministers, human nature being what it is, continue to lie and cheat, but their misdemeanors were individual, not structural. Once caught out, they were shamed and their careers destroyed. So first of all, I'm going to drop a big old X to doubt on that. Going to drop an X to doubt. I don't believe that was the norm at all. That I have no, I need numbers to see whether this was the norm or not. And also, people would have their careers destroyed because they got caught, not because they were corrupt, right? That is the problem. The problem is the act of getting caught. So, it's not individual, it is still structural. I hate to be that guy, it is entirely structural. He's just a bit too old to transform his entire ontology. As much as he sees the individual parts of the puzzle, he can't put them together. Yeah, sacked for doing the corruption badly. That is actually how this would happen. Okay, so he makes the comment here, the left has a tendency to believe it is uniquely virtuous, again, not convinced on that, and that this special virtue gives it a privileged relationship with the truth. So, I did make a note here that this is a straw man, but then I realised he's talking about Tony Blair as the left. He's talking about Blairites here. He's not actually talking about any left that actually exists meaningfully anymore. So he's really taking a shot at the Blairites here more than anyone else. And it becomes clear later in the book that was the case. Apologies for the harsh note there. And I have to regretfully disagree with this paragraph here that I will read out. This attitude survived in the left in the post-war world. The truth was important to them only insofar as it confirmed their worldview or the needs of some particular progressive cause. It was especially on show in the protests of the Vietnam War, when the need to turn people against the war led the left to mythologize the Viet Cong and communist tyrant Ho Chi Minh. First of all, ahistorical bullshit. We know, we reviewed the Jakarta method on the stream. We know that Ho Chi Minh was willing to contest democratic elections against the South Vietnamese government. The South Vietnamese government, backed by the US, cancelled the elections. So again, I don't know many fucking tyrants who go, I will voluntarily contest a free and fair election against my very unpopular opponent. And then, and also, Ho Chi Minh's legacy is entirely validated by Vietnam's pandemic response, which, I'm going to put this out there, would have been literally impossible had an American victory occurred, and many millions more people would have died. Peter Oborne, ahistorical and wrong on Vietnam. Viet Cong, own. Sorry, hate to break it to him. I'm coming in quite hot on this one. There was a lot more that I didn't like. There was a lot more that I remember not liking about this book. Blair's three immediate successors as Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, David Cameron, and Theresa May, were capable of being devious, the understatement of the century from Peter Oborne. But this made them part of the pattern of worldly 20th century Prime Ministers, like Harold Wilson and John Major. They were not habitual liars, and all three were driven, like Wilson and Major before them, by a sense of public duty and integrity. As much as he actually does a very good job providing references and citations here, he neglected to provide a citation here, I think because he knows that in the case of Gordon, in the case of at least David Cameron, Theresa May, and John Major, that is not correct. Probably in the case of Gordon Brown, not correct. Probably in the case of Harold Wilson, not entirely correct. So, yeah. Yes, exactly, Sleeping Dragon. If only the left had sided with the famously virtuous and non-tyrannical government of South Vietnam. Nothing, Of course, you should have sided with North Vietnam. That is the easiest call in the history of the human race, I think, especially given the atrocities committed in that war. And anyway, before I get into a whole thing about the Vietnam War, we must move forward. So basically, he claims he's going to prove that the standards of truth-telling in politics collapsed at the precise moment Boris Johnson entered 10 Downing Street. Yes, it is. Taylor writes, that's correct. It is weird. It is odd for him to project like that. He's a trad-Atlanticist. Of course he is. He's a Tory. He's a fucking Tory, yeah. Okay, I will be a bit more specific about what I mean. He's a Christian Democrat in almost the exact sense that we were talking about on the Hearts of Iron stream when we were talking about Italy. He is the kind of person who would have voted for the Christian Democrats in Italy and probably would have ended up right in the middle of a Christian Democrat party. Which perhaps explains the 2019 vote for Corbyn at that point. He's a One Nation Tory. I'm not even buying that at this point. But, especially the way he talks about some people. But anyway. So, before the moment that Boris Johnson... Yeah, CDU in Germany. He actually specifically cites Angela Merkel's government quite a lot in this. Before this moment, those engaged in public life could join in the national conversation, regardless of what political tradition they held from or which party they supported. He needs to prove that later in the book, and I don't think he proved it in the book. And also, we know for a fact that this isn't true. We know for a fact this isn't true. This is not correct. At all, right? We know for a fact that there were active things done to prevent people from certain political ideologies from interacting in public life. That is something that is known. I find it odd that he, given how relatively well researched this book is compared to other stuff, just doesn't know that or doesn't acknowledge it. Which makes me think that he thinks it was good, actually, for these things. But, okay, so we move forward. This is because before July 2019, however strongly they disagreed with one another, there was a common standard of factual accuracy on which people of goodwill could agree. Again, I don't think that's true. Given a lot of the post-2015 up to July 2019 period, I think that's not true. I don't think that's true. I think he's observing something completely incorrectly here. He's completely misread. Misread when this change may have happened, at least to him. He just seems to really dislike Boris Johnson. Okay. I just highlighted this. I didn't make a note here. Why do I not make notes? Why do I refuse to make notes in my books? That is a bold statement. I agree. That is a bold statement. That is an incredibly bold statement. Not bold, not politically bold. Bold. So he talks about the press a bit here. He does talk about the press. He does go in on the press quite a bit. So he says that newspapers have also exposed the lies and the venality of the rich and powerful. Indeed, it has been part of their corporate myth and their moral self-justification, but it was more than a myth. For years and years, even popular and partisan publications prided themselves on being newspapers of record. They made efforts to verify what they were told. So I'm inclined here to be like, yeah, they probably did double check at certain points. And this is an interesting thing, and we should look forward to this. In Chapter 7, I will show that when it came to Boris Johnson, much of the press and the media renounced that role. Britain's mainstream reporters and editors collectively turned a blind eye to his lies, misrepresentations, and falsehoods promoted by Johnson and his ministers. And here we see, I will provide examples, name those responsible, cite some of the articles, and expose the relationship with unnamed government sources. We are all familiar with the unnamed sources. Our favourite people. Our favourite people in the world are, of course, the unnamed sources. We love them. We love to hear about unnamed sources that are not called Tom Watson or anything like that. That's never happened before. Never been an unnamed source. So, let me see. So he's gonna, throughout this, compare Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, which is, of course, like, the popular thing to do. But I think the only reason this is happening is because they exist at approximately the same time. So, we read, Johnson and Trump find themselves joining in a common crusade against liberal democracy and using lies and falsehoods to fight their battles. They both believe that popular support, the will of the people, gives them the legitimacy to take on elected chambers, the rule of law, the civil service, and also the political parties they lead. So I make this point, which is that in Boris Johnson's case, the will of the people granted him an 80-seat majority in the elected chamber he's supposed to be challenging. My guess is the will of the people is kind of alright with him doing this, which is the thing that's kind of difficult to grapple with, right? And also, like, the political party he runs literally put him in as leader. That's not doesn't make any fucking sense, right? Well, see, Grasping Kulak, the thing is, it's not that he doesn't understand. He thinks a status quo exists that doesn't anymore, which is fair. Like, he can believe the country is whatever he wants to believe it is. It just doesn't match with observable reality, and that matters in this book. I almost feel kind of bad going in on the book because the poor guy just wants his country back in the most pure sense. Like, he just wants this country where nothing bad happens back. But yeah, there you go. There's a thing that I wrote here. So he's basically against cynicism, which I'm like, well, I mean, come on, man. Like, it's not really alright to be like against cynicism given what's happened. And he makes the note here, and if we want to keep our freedoms, we can't let liars and cheats get away with it. Which, I will not reframe that into a call to action, but given that democratic action doesn't resolve that, you wonder what the logical conclusion of that is. I certainly couldn't say. Another fantastic... Peter Oborne's new book, Hey Man, Where's My Country? That would have been a better fucking... a better fucking title for this stream, so I'm a bit embarrassed. But I am going to do a Hey Dude, Where's My Car YouTube video title at some point. Good evening. We're still early on in the book. It is a shorter book, I will say. There's about, I say old chap, where's my country, yes. He does seem a thoroughly decent sort, does Peter Oborne, but like, it's not good so far. It does improve. He picks up in the middle. In Britain, we have long prided ourselves that we do things differently. I mean, that's an understatement. The law, courts, parliament, an impartial civil service. Again, he keeps talking about an impartial civil service. I just keep going extra doubt in my head. And free press are part of a constitutional arrangement, which for 2 centuries has prevented liars, charlatans, cheats, and fascists from gaining power. I will remind Peter Oborne at this point that that we had fascists on the benches in Parliament, pretty much, and they were government ministers. Like, come on, man. It's not preventing anything. If anything, the people allied with fascists seem to win more often than not. And the one thing I kind of give him credit for, I'm gonna give him credit for, because we've all met this kind of person who's like, I just want Britain back. I want British values. I know what British values are. And you ask them to name British values, and they can't name a fucking thing. Like, Peter Oborne at least knows what he thinks Britain was, and knows what he wants, which is fine. It's just not a thing that has existed at any point, right? Yeah, he basically wants post-war social democracy back, which, again, yeah, would explain some of his softer attitude than typical. He wants to be right-wing opposition in a social democracy. I think he wants to be like the 19... Like, not Churchill, because I do know he won in the 50s, but like he wants to be like a 1960s Tory Prime Minister. That's what he wants. Like, he wants to be a 1960s Tory Prime Minister who might lose to a Harold Wilson. So, you know. Anyway. So he defines, and I appreciate that he does this. I appreciate that he does this because people neglect to do this a lot. He defines what he means by lie here, which is important. Because he is trying to assert the point that Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, as a sort of additional component to this, are liars, right? So, here are his tests for what a lie is. The first test of a lie is that its user intends it to be believed. A lie may be uttered in the full knowledge that it is false, or with complete indifference to its veracity, or as lawyers say, recklessness as to the truth. In either case, it can contain an actual falsehood, but not always. It may, for example, involve a series of truthful statements, but omits a piece of the jigsaw without which everything else is misleading. Or it may place a series of individually true statements in such a relationship as to induce false inference from them. Above all, any kind of lie must also be intended to deceive. This judgment of motive makes use of the term lie especially hard. It involves looking into the workings of someone's mind and making a judgment. Ultimately, only God can do that. I feel like we can more or less say that in the case that he uses here, that I can assert that this person was a liar. But anyway, he follows on in the next paragraph. Take the case of Tony Blair. Can we get some tonties in the chat for Tony Blair? Because he does come up a lot. Blair continues to assert to this day that he never lied to the British people about Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction ahead of the 2003 Iraq War. He accepts that he passed on false information about Saddam's weaponry in order to make the case for war, but he insists he did this in good faith because he genuinely believed it was true. And yeah, basically, he makes the point that, in fact, there's actually quite a relative topical bit after this, so I didn't highlight it, but I will read this bit to you. No one can ever challenge Blair about this until the day he goes on the public record and states that he knew what he was saying at the time was nonsense, and he's unlikely to do that. Ultimately, Blair is in the same position as the Kastom people in Vanuatu, who believe that Prince Philip is a divine being. The Kastom people may well be mistaken, but it is unfair to challenge their good faith. Again, I'm only mentioning that because, one, Prince Philip is dead, so that's, you know, I won't ask anyone to honk in the chat, but if you would like to, please do. But also that is a bit of an odd comparison. I'm not sure those two things are the same at all. I think he's done an apple and oranges thing there that maybe he shouldn't have done. It strikes me as a bit not ideal. It read as very odd, and also, yeah, well. Unfortunately for Boris Johnson, so he explains why you can kind of put Tony Blair in a different box to Boris Johnson. Unfortunately for Boris Johnson, the Blair/Vanuatu defense does not work for him. Take his notorious inverted pyramid of piffle denial that he was having an affair with a colleague at the Spectator magazine. Well, here we go. Here, Johnson was not simply making a statement that contained a falsehood. He knew that the statement he was making was false. And it goes on. So he talks about the 2019 general election here. He specifically... Yeah, exactly, Teo. I just want these people to be left alone more than anything. Like, yeah. Also, studying Fangirl, honk is a reference to Limmy's Honk if Thatcher's dead clip, which is very funny, and Lemmy is just generally quite a funny guy. Streams during the day, though. I can't really catch him. Anyway, yeah, also do Honk if Thatcher's dead, I guess, since I invited it. Yeah, you kind of the logic that's going here. So he talks about the 40 hospitals claim that Boris Johnson made. And so I'm going to highlight this bit. But the Prime Minister's statement was rubbished by fact checkers, and he was asked about it by skeptical interviewers. He was surrounded by advisors in a position to put him right, yet the Prime Minister went on repeating the claim about 40 hospitals as the general election drew near. It's unreasonable to assume that Boris Johnson, along with Health Secretary Matt Hancock, if you have the Trash Future Matt emote, please do drop that now, who also made the claim, was suffering from a mental delusion. So, again, the thing I find interesting from this thing is that he's like, oh yeah, there were skeptical interviewers. Why then did the skeptical interviewers not confront him more forcefully? There's a layer of the thing here that's missing to me. Anyway, here's what he's going to do. He's going to analyse his methods, hold him to account, and spell out the consequences for all of us of his nightmare epistemological universe. Oh my god, that's a mouthful. But yeah. We move into chapter 2. I can't count today. Apologies, everyone, for the counting error. Turns out 2 was a bit too much for me. I have another drink. So, chapter 2, the 2019 election. One lie after another. And we open with a quote from Boris Johnson himself. He does make good use of the quotes. I will credit him. The only quote he put in here that I don't like is the Orwell quote. And indeed the Orwell references, not a fan of them. Well, what did Boris Johnson say should happen to politicians who lie? Lie to the public specifically? Well, they should be made to go on their knees through the chamber of the House of Commons, scourging themselves with copies of their offending documents which claim to prove one thing and actually prove something quite different. Yeah, Flying Rodent is great about this stuff. Well, we could have had Flying Rodent on the stream at some point. You know, that was not impossible. Maybe another time. Anyway, I just highlighted this because this fucking wound me up. So he's talking about the 2019 election as established in the chapter title. Boris Johnson then focuses on Jeremy Corbyn's plans to wreck the economy with a £1.2 trillion spending plan. At this stage of the campaign, Labour's manifesto has not been published, let alone costed. Johnson's £1.2 trillion was a fabrication. Like, this is a whole fucking thing, right? And then Boris Johnson continues to say that the Labour leader thinks home ownership is a bad idea and opposed to it, and Peter Oborne, diligent fact-checker that he is a competent writer. He is a completely I think I made this comment about another writer, which is, what's the Orwell quote? I will read out the Orwell quote to you when we get to it, because I highlighted it. But Peter Oborne, I said this about someone else, who also wrote a book. I disagreed with the other book more than this one. Probably should look into writing a fiction book, because I think they'd be very good at it. But Peter Oborne, diligent fact-checker that he is, found no evidence of that. This is just me highlighting shit that pissed me off, unfortunately, everyone. So, Johnson states that Jeremy Corbyn has made a speech calling for the abolition of the armed forces. A lie. I wish he had said that. That would have been fantastic. Yeah, B-Mark Kenosis, that's basically it. So at the end of his speech, Sky News presenter Samantha Washington does not challenge or correct any of Boris Johnson's false statements. This inertia was a typical example of the media letting Johnson get away unchallenged with lies, falsehoods, and fabrication. So the thing that annoys me here, and this is part of this is a yes and comment, right? It's like, yes, this is true. This is a thing. I don't think inertia is quite the right way to frame what happened. But what is the next step up from that? Why was this a systemic problem? What is it about the press in the UK that made them unlikely to challenge Boris Johnson? You know, what is it? You know, what is the next layer up from this? Ow, my neck, Orwell. Oh, God. You can't when I'm doing, like, one of these things. Okay, so this is something I kind of forgot. And if you want an illustration of Boris Johnson as a character, if you're not from the UK, which, by the way, lucky you, this is a great way to talk about, a great way to just sum up Boris Johnson. During a visit to a hospital, he told doctors that he'd given up drink, when only the previous day he'd been filmed sipping whiskey on a visit to a distillery, and he sipped beer on film the day after in a pub, which, yeah, you would think Oborne would know. It's just that he's declining to say, and declining to say is, I don't know. It's a choice. He is making a choice to decline to add that analysis to it. Also, I completely forgot this. This is a fucking ridiculous quote. I had to highlight this because I genuinely didn't believe that this was a fucking thing that was actually said. And I actually had to go, and it wasn't because I thought Peter Oborne made it up, obviously, but I had to check that this was a real thing, and it was real. So this is what Boris Johnson said, interviewed in the Sunday Times, what he thought would happen, what he thought happened after the 2012 Olympics. There was a big baby boom after the Olympics, as I prophesied in a speech in 2012. It was quite amazing. There was a big baby boom. And one of the things that, I just can't wrap my head around is, did Boris Johnson think the Olympics made people incredibly horny? Or, also, there's something fantastic about the word prophesized here that I just can't quite wrap my, by his own definition, he's lying then. Well, quite possibly. That would be a strong accusation to make. But that's a real fucking quote from Boris Johnson there that actually is real. I did not know that was a thing that was said. I mean, it wouldn't have changed my opinion on him. It's already quite negative. But damn, that is a powerful set of words. Maybe Lib Dems got horny. Well, certainly plausible, isn't it? Anyway, we have to move on. This Peter Oborne is probably who isn't getting horny over the Olympics. Literally everyone else, chat. Come on, behave yourselves, chat. We need some decorum here as I move forward. So there was, of course, this infamous incident that I made a note on, which I do have an additional note for. As the cameras rolled, Johnson replied, so this is the situation with Amar Salem, who was in the hospital and confronted Boris Johnson about NHS cuts. Boris Johnson replies to him after that saying, well, actually, there's no press here. The man Amar Salem was incredulous. What do you mean there's no press here? He said, pointing to the camera, who are these people? I think it would have been good for Peter Oborne to then talk about what the press did to Amar Salem and how that operates within this relationship that they have with Boris Johnson, allowing him to get away with these falsehoods. Because if you will recall, what happened after that wasn't that we talked about Boris Johnson lying barefaced to a member of the public. We ended up, well, we didn't, the press ended up trawling through this poor guy's bins. Now, and he does not mention Koonsberg after that. He does not. He declines to mention Laura Koonsberg, which I found interesting. And, the poor guy was doxxed. Lots of information was released about him. He, it was really bad. I felt really bad for this guy. This poor guy, I think his son was in hospital. And then he has to deal with the nightmare of our press essentially muckraking about him. But he does not mention Laura Koonsberg after this. And he just goes through a whole list of lies here about Nicola Sturgeon and Jeremy Corbyn. So I'll read this passage out because I clearly highlighted it for some reason. But, okay, Johnson lied systematically about his political opponents. One of his targets was Nicola Sturgeon, but the main attack was on the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. Not content with falsely asserting that Corbyn wanted to dismantle the armed forces, Johnson went on the Andrew Marr show to claim that the Labour leader had said he would disband MI5. Again, we wish that would have been fucking awesome. Marr did not demur, but to be sure, I looked at the Labour manifesto. It contained no mention of MI5, but did pledge to ensure closer counter-terrorism coordination between the police and the security services, combining neighborhood expertise with international intelligence. A pretty bog-standard liberal position, I would say, from the big man, unfortunately, but that's the reality of leading a melt party, I suppose. Corbyn has never said he would disband MI5, another lie. Okay. And we follow on to some of the more overtly racist aspects of the campaign. The Conservative Party, though not Johnson himself so far as I can tell, also claimed that Jeremy Corbyn had a plan for unlimited and uncontrolled immigration if he won the election. The due diligence website Fact Check judged that the claim was based on extreme assumptions which were not credible. Yeah. Not credible is a pretty apt summary of pretty much all of the shit that Boris Johnson did during this election. It's good that it's written down by someone who's not just a leftist. There is another one that I've highlighted here. What's my note here? Is this a note for me? Oh, yeah, okay. This is a note for me, but I will read it out after I read this. No, actually, I will decline to read this because I've just reread it and I'm going to absolutely say the thing I shouldn't say. So we're not going to tempt fate here and risk the VOD because I do want this VOD to survive. And my note here is it's certainly not comparable. So what isn't comparable? Jeremy Corbyn did not threaten anyone with imprisonment, starvation, or execution. At most, he intended to reduce Britain's billionaires to the status of multimillionaires by taxation. To compare this to the persecution of the kulaks was to trash history and language and insult all of Stalin's victims, not making a comment on any of the specifics about the Soviet Union, but it is certainly not comparable. Certainly not. And yeah, Sleeping Dragons, he mentions that exact incident. One thing this is not, is it's not lacking in detail. Considering how short this book is, he covers a lot of ground. He covers it quite well. And, credit to him. He's not, CCHQ, yes. They did that, yes. Yeah, if GCHQ did that, we would have an entirely different set of questions about this. And it would be a slightly more urgent matter. And I would not have reacted so calmly to it. Which, what has my mum just texted me? Excuse me, everyone. Oh, my mum's watching. Alright, I guess my mum's watching. She just texted me. Hi, mum. I was, to explain to my mum what's happened, I start the streams a bit later when I'm reading a book. So, yes, everyone say hi to my mum. Oh, buy one of these yes, absolutely. If you want one of these, my good friends at Praxis Cast, Podcasters Praxis, they have a Teespring where you can get one of these. Absolutely recommend it to you all. And they are a good bunch of lads, and they deserve every success and all of the money, I guess. So there was this entire, stuff about Russian interference in elections. And basically, the summary of the entire crisis is that Boris Johnson had delayed the appropriate procedures, and there was a series of ass covering that happened. And there's an interesting passage here. So, Rishi Sunak was one of the people. You will be. Yeah, I hope you didn't see us talk about the Olympics, a thing I famously did not like. But. Rishi Sunak was one of the people, he wasn't Chancellor then, of course, wheeled out to try and defend this as part of this operation. I suppose it's kind of like a rite of passage in the Tory party to lie. But he makes a note here. Rishi Sunak's conduct highlights one of the unhappy consequences of having a liar as Prime Minister. Sunak, a young politician on the rise, was obliged to substantiate Boris Johnson's lies. Again, it is a real thing. What he's pointed out here is a real thing. If you have a type of character at the top of a structure, that does have impacts, right? But I'm not convinced that Tory junior minister lies on TV to cover the ass of the Tory party is a new dynamic created by Boris Johnson. I'm not convinced. And obliged is doing a lot of work. Okay. in fairness, he explains what obliged means here, because he goes on to say to contradict the official line would mean leaving the government. So that is the dynamic at play. He's identified a real thing here. I'm not saying Peter Oborne has not identified a correct thing here. I'm just saying that I am unconvinced that this is a new thing, a new thing, right? This has happened before, and he knows it's happened before because he talks about Tony Blair's government. I find it odd that he thinks this is so different, because the way he describes these things, and he describes them well, to be clear, are the same. They're exactly the fucking same. He doesn't, in the description of them, make a big enough distinction for me. Anyway, the Prime Minister's biggest lies involve Brexit, so he has a thing with Brexit here. And he repeatedly insisted there would be no customs checks or controls on goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Famously, that is fine now. Nothing bad came of this at all. And again, his main issue with this isn't the issue that I might have with this, but because it would compromise the integrity of the United Kingdom itself. And there is a lot of technical stuff here about the mechanics of Brexit. Terror rights, that's exactly it. I'm not, so far, we'll see as we continue whether you disagree with me or not, but he hasn't found an inflection point that persuades me that this isn't just a long-term structural thing. I don't see it, right? I make this note again. I said this before, but I'll read out the excerpt that makes me write this note again. During a TV debate with Jeremy Corbyn, moderator Julie Etchingham noted that Boris Johnson's deal would create a trade border down the Irish Sea. The Prime Minister replied, "Not at all. Northern Ireland is part of the customs territory of the UK." Now, Boris Johnson here did something actually quite clever, which is that he was entirely technically correct. It is still part of the customs territory. This is my commentary. This is not how he wrote it, by the way, as you could probably tell. But his deal with Europe agreed that Northern Ireland would continue to follow many EU rules on food and manufactured goods, unlike the rest of the UK. So my question here is, my Johnson voice. I'm not going to do the Johnson voice very much. I haven't quite found the sweet spot for the Johnson. It's not like Keith, where the sweet spot's just anywhere up in the nasal area. Like Boris Johnson's down here. It's like, quite. Anyway, so my question is, before we do more voice acting, why was he allowed to get away with this, even when confronted by a journalist, right? Again, there's this layer here at play that isn't really explored. What is it about being a journalist in the UK that even when confronted by a liar in the form of Boris Johnson, that you can't push on from that? Gotta push the double chin out. Well, and we move on to one of just the things that pissed me off during the election personally. When reporter Michael Crick, who, if those of you who have access to the drops will know, said the infamous line, "This is Mike Gapes." One of my favourite drops. So he put to Johnson that he had led a referendum campaign which exploited fears about immigration from Turkey. Johnson replied, "I didn't say anything about Turkey in the referendum campaign. I didn't say anything about Turkey at all." Pressed again, he added, "I didn't make any remarks about Turkey, mate." And yet a week before the referendum, Boris Johnson wrote in a joint letter with his Vote Leave colleagues, Michael Gove and Gisela Stewart, noted scab Gisela Stewart, I won't
This
say that
is
bit.
Mike Gapes.
That's right. That's exactly who it is. The only way to avoid having common borders with Turkey is to vote leave. Thank you for playing This Is Mike Gapes and explaining what the bit was. Jowl heavy. Yeah, it's like British Nixon. Which I suppose is kind of fine because I do have the accent for it. But the 2019 general election was held on the eve of Brexit, the most momentous event in post-war British history, yet Johnson's Brexit fabrications were not held up to serious inspection by the media at any stage. So, at this point I wrote a note that is addressed later by him, a little bit, but something that occurred to me at this point, at least according to the note I wrote. I was very tired when I wrote this, judging from some of the spelling. and the lack of commas, but that's a whole other thing. Something that occurs to me at this point is that for a lot of the British press, Boris Johnson is like the ideal of how their careers would go, right? Because he was a journalist who then becomes a TV personality, who then becomes this, against all of the ridiculousness of his conduct, the fucking Prime Minister of the UK is, that might factor into why this relationship exists. And in fairness to Peter Oborne, he does go on to talk about this a tiny bit. And he makes the point here that I think is actually something that's quite overlooked, and it's good that he's stated it so plainly here. One reason why Boris Johnson gets away with lying is that so many voters like him. Correct. Absolutely correct. Peter Oborne, 100% correct on that one. Good job here. This is the bit where I got really stem-brained and was like, he has done a lot of citations here, but it's basically just him talking about the Conservative Research Department, which prepared the political brief for the Tory candidates, as of course they would, and basically, having looked at it, it is wall-to-wall bullshit. To put it in a slightly less polite way than Peter Oborne did in the book. And of course, we have the infamous moment. A lot of this is just, hey, do you remember this happening? And it just upsets me again. He talks about the incident during the election where Keir Starmer, who's of course a friend of the stream, Keir Starmer, where the Tories doctored a clip of Keir Starmer to make it look like he was fumbling with his words. Now, obviously, these days you wouldn't have to edit the clips at all. But in fairness to Keir Starmer, and we're going to be fair in this one case, he did answer the question pretty much immediately and quite fluently, so it was some pretty misleading editing at the best of times. And he talks about, following on, a comparable moment occurred during the ITV leadership debate on the 19th of November, when the official Conservative Press Office Twitter account changed its name to Fact Check UK. Yes, these days. Alright, I said these days. Everyone move past it. Alright, move on. But yeah, they did Fact Check UK, that was a whole fucking thing, and of course, would you believe that Fact Check UK found that everything Jeremy Corbyn was saying was false, but everything Boris Johnson said was true, even though, as Peter Oborne kind of makes the point here, might have been the opposite of reality. And so this is a section that's kind of relevant to my next video that's coming out hopefully on Monday, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed, everyone, if you're excited for the NIP video. But, Raab defended the Tories' fake Twitter account by saying that no one gives a toss about the social media cut and thrust. Again, given this, let's see. This remark was an obvious lie. Social media was at the heart of the Tory party general election strategy. Figures from the Electoral Commission reveal that the Conservatives spent £2.1 million on Facebook advertising alone during the 2017 election campaign. In comparison, Labour spent £577,000. In the 2019 election, the Conservatives spent over £1 million on Facebook advertisements and a further £1.76 million on Google advertisements, plus more than £100,000 for a single advert at the top of YouTube's homepage in the final days of the campaign. The sums spent show that the Conservative Party cares very much about the social media cut and thrust. Now, I will make this point in the video, but this does tell us something. The Tories are not... There are a lot of things. They're not people who spend their money to waste it, right? Especially not in elections. And it also shows that the Labour Party are dipshits, but that's a topic well covered on this channel, like every other month we do this, right? But lies notwithstanding, this does tell us something about the importance of social media in elections, and I cast my gaze at the Northern Independence Party a little bit here, and wonder, and ask questions, and think about their social media operation, which admittedly could be tightened up, but then again, if Philip Proudfoot is watching, I'm happy to do that. I'm looking for work, it's true. Anyway, Okay, so we're on to chapter 3. We're making not entirely great progress here, but we're having a good time. At least I hope we're all having a good time. Anyway, this is the Orwell quote that wound me up. Well, it didn't wind me up. I just don't like seeing Orwell quoted in general. This is chapter 3, The Triumph of Political Lying. So, the quote from Orwell goes as follows. The Catholic and the communist are alike in assuming that an opponent cannot be both honest and intelligent. I didn't know whether that was a good Orwell voice. I don't know what he sounded like. I assumed he was much more weedy and snitch-like, but you know, I can't quite sustain that voice for a particularly long period, as much as I wish I could. So he talks about this figure, John Profumo, who basically is one of these people who disgraced themselves. He was involved in a big scandal in the post-war. Sorry, not in the post-war, but he was involved in he was involved in Britain's most notorious political scandal of the post-war era. Basically, he did an affair. And unfortunately, in this case, the person he was having an affair with was also having an affair with a Soviet Navy attaché, which is, well, as you might imagine, gonna cause a problem. And he denied any impropriety, then was forced to resign. Again, this is a case of sorry I got caught, I think. But the thing he says here is that, like, he was completely, he was completely removed from public life. He retired and devoted himself to charity work, which, if it was left at that, I'd be like, fine. At least he did something afterwards. It sounds like he didn't waste his time wallowing. But 30 years later, Margaret Thatcher invited him to her 70th birthday party. Everyone, I invite you to honk if Thatcher's dead. Where he was placed on the right-hand side of the Queen. Profumo was the paradoxical embodiment of a governing system where integrity counted. Misleading the Commons was regarded with special horror. But again, this is the thing. He had to resign. That's true. He had to retire, and he got to do his charity work and whatever. And it's fine. You can do charity work after you're disgraced. After that point, it doesn't matter to me, right? In fact, arguably, I wouldn't have given a shit about any of it at the time anyway. But it's regarded with special horror, yet he's still invited to all of these things. He still exists within all of these circles. Like, he's not expelled from the inner circle of, these people. He exists there still, right? I don't see, I guess what I'm thinking is that he thinks, the fact the guy's frontline political career was ended and he had to not be an MP anymore was the system works. But the system as he's described it doesn't just do that. Right? That's not what he described. Also, thank you for the follow. I'm not reading that one out. You thought you could get me with that one. I'm not reading that one out. I apologize if it's not. Also, notably, the issue was about publicized sexual impropriety rather than just lying, like it was part of a moral panic. Yes, exactly. That is materially different. Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. I like the username. You almost caught me with it, admittedly, but sometimes I do pay attention. But also, great name. I appreciate it. I feel like for that, I have to give you VIP for the name alone. But we'll move forward. So he explains why he's compelled to write this book here. Is this my mum? No. Oh, got roasted in the chat. You hate to see it. Alright, everyone. No, my mum's account is known. She has an account that's well known. So to attempt to explain the destruction and collapse of the 20th century code of public integrity, again, I don't see the inflection point before now where that was degraded and that this just wasn't just a smooth continuity of it, right? I'm not seeing it yet. There is this section here where he talks about. My mum is What is this waffling about? I'm waffling about a book. Come on. Anyway, he talks about lies are often, though not always, justified in wartime, which, again, I find kind of fair enough here. They are also occasionally acceptable in peacetime. So the example he uses to justify this claim. The example cited by Waldegrave involved Jim Callaghan, who in the autumn of 1967 is held to have ruled out the devaluation of sterling because which he knew to be imminent because he wished to prevent a run on sterling, which would have cost the Bank of England a fortune. But my alright, see you later. But my thing here is, at this point, isn't this, at least in the worldview that he's trying to present here, doesn't this naturally lead to the degradation of the public sphere? I'm not sure how it's completely fine here. Anyway, nevertheless, when Callaghan became Prime Minister, he cared about integrity, and he makes an entirely false claim here, which is, contrary to claims made by opponents, so did his successors, Margaret Thatcher and John Major. Again, citation needed. I would need to see some evidence there, I think. And this changed with Tony Blair when he became Prime Minister in 1997. So now we're on to Tony Blair. He brought with him into 10 Downing Street a dislike of candour and a structural preference for deceit that remained a hallmark of his leadership until he left office 10 years later. This dishonesty defined his relationship with the Labour Party, with the British people and with Whitehall. Eventually, Blair used the lie, Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction, as the pretext to drag Britain into war with Iraq. So again, good that it's called out as a lie. And not Boris Johnson, Tonti continues in 2016 to say, so this is his turning point. Yeah, it seems to be. In 2016, Tonti said, I believe we made the right decision and the world is better and safer. And to that I say, yeah, we're really swimming in safety right now, aren't we? We're really swimming in it, in the world. Anyway, so there's a description here of why he thinks New Labour believed it was justified in lying. So, they told me the same thing. Labour had been in opposition for 18 years before the general election victory of 1997. They felt, with good reason, that a venal Tory supporting press had distorted, misrepresented and often lied about Labour policy. So Blair and his advisers felt that there was no way Labour would win power, let alone retain it, if it relied on telling the truth. And I don't think this is a fantastic... This is not a bad analysis. But this entire system does not strike me as one that leads to good governance in general. And incidentally, I do, and it's just occurred to me now, I wonder if this is what the Keith faction of Labour are trying to do, because they seem intent on refusing to tell the truth at every turn. Yeah, well, Labour attempted to tell the truth, and look what got them. Alright, see you later, Tim. Have a good time doing parenting stuff. Yeah, why is that unique to New Labour? I don't know. Given that the Conservative Party almost certainly employed some deception in its time in opposition, I don't see what the particular Labour of it, New Labour of it, I should say, is. So they also told me Labour believed it was virtuous and sought power not for itself, but in order to serve the British people. Thank you for the follow, Robert. Didn't read that one out. I didn't read the last one out. I read that one out, and I probably read it out wrong. Apologies to you. So, but to serve the British people, this gave the party, so Blair loyalists believed, a plausible moral justification for telling the lies that were needed to keep it in power. And there's two things here. Two things. One is, again, the point that Teo made, which is, how is this unique to New Labour? didn't the John Major governments? Well, the John Major governments were pretty much a write-off at the second one, admittedly. But like, how is this different from what previous governments have done? I'm not sure. And also, it is interesting that this kind of serves as a partial explanation for why New Labour figures are just consummate liars and self-serving snakes. It does, and it explains why the second generation of Blairites are all such like hollow, worthless people as they are, who seem to only know how to deceive and backstab and lie. It explains a lot. He also makes the comparison here between Blair and Clinton, and I get it, but a lot of these comparisons, Trump and Johnson, Clinton and Blair, feels to me like Peter Oborne has gone, these things existed at the same time in Anglophonic countries, therefore there must be some fundamental connection between them, which I just am not, I'm not quite getting it yet. I'm not there. I might not be reading this in the way that Peter Oborne intends it to be read. I'm just not getting it yet. Okay. So this is a section which second generation Blairites. I understood what you meant. I do not doubt the sincerity of Tony Blair and some, though probably not all of his supporters. Well, wonder who he means by that. He should probably be specific. However, the belief that Blair and New Labour had a special dispensation to ignore the truth in a noble purpose gave a license to any successor to do the same out of pure self-interest. Tony Blair paved the way for Boris Johnson, who has created a new epistemological universe. I find this difficult to take as an analysis, right? I mostly buy what he's saying, right? I buy that Tony Blair leads to Boris Johnson. Tony Blair creates the conditions that make a Boris Johnson premiership more likely. I buy and understand that, and by and large agree with that analysis, at least on the surface. I'm not sure that the lying is new, because he has cited moments where people have lied before. And yeah, he's reading intention into people, right? I'm trying to read these quotes with as much context as possible. So, just within reason, because we only have a limited amount of time to talk about the book. So by the time the Blair premiership ended in 2007, I'd got into the habit of keeping a file of political lies, which I imagine must have driven the poor man insane, admittedly, but well, nonetheless, he was a sin eater for us in this case. My file shows that Blair's successors, Gordon Brown, David Cameron, and Theresa May, were capable of subterfuge, though not remotely on the scale of Tony Blair. All three prime ministers were driven by a sense of duty and keenly aware of the difference between truth and falsehood. Again, there's a lot to say about this quote, right? One is he's reading intention again. I think that's not something he should be doing. Two is all three of those prime ministers told some pretty egregious lies. Gordon Brown probably the least dishonest of the three, if I had to guess. Sleeping Dragons, yes, Corbyn was a Czech spy, came out when May was still prime minister. Though I think Peter Oborne here would say Theresa May didn't substantiate it at any point. Though I think Tory ministers certainly did. In fact, one Tory MP was famously sued by Jeremy Corbyn and forced to pay a 5-figure sum to a food bank in his constituency. And boy, does his constituency need it, because I've been to Mansfield. It's worth noting that David Cameron in the press called Jeremy Corbyn a terrorist sympathiser because he didn't want to bomb Syria. Windrush scandal, yes. There is a long list here that we can't really go too deep into because we'll be here for the rest of the stream. But yes, Sleeping Dragon, exactly. This is the thing. This is the thing about being the leader of anything, right? You don't have to do it yourself. Whereas Boris Johnson likes doing... I think the thing he's upset about with Boris Johnson is that Boris Johnson is doing it himself and doing it in a uncouth way. It's a lot like the Trump derangement, which makes the Trump comparison... I've pivoted to the Trump comparison actually being good again. Because he's doing Trump derangement, but for Boris Johnson. Anyway, actually, he talks here about the comparison, about where Boris Johnson rates. Not so Boris Johnson. As a liar, he cannot be compared to Tony Blair. At least he admits he's a liar. He has never needed a noble justification for lying. He lies habitually, with impunity, and without conscience. This puts his dishonesty into the same category as Donald Trump's. Although far below Trump's in scale and stridency, it is epic by British standards. Of course, using a very literal meaning of the word epic there. I don't think he thinks it was very cool. But yeah, so that's that bit. So he's justifying his comparison here because he's saying that like Bill Clinton and Tony Blair told the same type of lie, right? They told the lie because they thought they were justified in lying, whereas Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, I will read how he describes their lies. Okay, he's back. We're happy to see him. They lie with humour and relish. They invent damaging falsehoods about political opponents, whether it be Johnson's unsupported assertion that Jeremy Corbyn wanted to dismantle the British Armed Forces, or Trump's repeated claim that Barack Obama was born in Kenya. I'm not... I don't know what to say about that, to be honest. Just trying to bait me into say it. I'm not going to say it. But there is a fantastic chapter title here. I want to read it out to you because, boy, I mean, the chapter titles in this are certainly a highlight. It kept me entertained. Chapter 4, Britain's first gonzo Prime Minister, which I just find that, yes, terrorites, that's true. It is a little odd because they're two materially different things to me. One definitely involved a heavy dose of something that the other did not. He does this throughout. He does quite odd comparisons. I just don't. I'm not quite getting it. I'm not. Maybe it's just maybe I'm not the intended audience. Admittedly, I get the sense that I'm not the intended audience. Yeah, Sleeping Dragon. Yeah, exactly. Right, but the thing is, he describes here about a type of political leader, a type of guy. Yeah, Britain's first gonzo PM, that's a name on Twitter that you can absolutely have. Tell them where you got it. So, I'm going to sort of summarize at the end what I think about certain omissions. What do I think of the Coriolis effect? I mean, I think it's a fact of physics, to be honest with you. But yeah, they are called by their first name or have the same kind of jokey nicknames as soap opera characters. Again, kind of highlighting why I don't like calling Boris Johnson Boris, but yeah. It's a good try. So he talks about a change in... Okay, so I'll read this bit out to you, just to give as much context as possible. Also, Labour 9 points behind. Can we get some care hams in the chat? I want to see exactly 9 care ham emotes from everyone who's got it. Also, dude, if you're going to keep spamming the chat, I'm going to... Yeah. Anyway. I want to see 9 care hams from everyone. Like, come on. You can't keep spamming the chat. Anyway. Political correspondents were much slower to... Okay, I'll read the chapter before so you have maximum context here. The Cambridge philosopher had made his early reputation by bringing back morality to the study of moral philosophy. Nah, it's alright, and participation, don't worry about it. Which had become an arid and technical subject in the post-war era. His final substantial work attacked the prevalent notion in the academic world that there was no such thing as truth. Williams' concern with morality enabled him to understand at an early stage that fact was mutating into fiction, and vice versa. Political correspondents were much slower to comprehend this change, let alone its consequences, which is why we have been such useless guides to the great upheavals of recent years. And okay, so I don't completely reject that on its face. I buy that there might be something to that. But I feel like there's something more to them not grasping the shift. Are institutional biases a factor here? Is the type of person who becomes a political correspondent a factor here? Do those people have particular loyalties to certain political institutions, political parties, that means they don't want to see things, right? Again, we're missing a layer here, and he knows this. I refuse to believe that he doesn't know what it is. But anyway, no one knows. No one can say. No one can figure it out. This is the annoying thing. He's like fucking physics student who's done all of the working out but refused to write the final line. It's really annoying. Incidentally, it talks about Boris Johnson's career here and his time in Brussels. He reported that the EU wanted to ban prawn cocktail crisps, in which case I would give critical support to the EU in that case. He filed a sensational story on plans to blow up the Berlaymont building, headquarters of the European Commission. The Berlaymont still stands today, 3 decades later, and prawn cocktails crisps are still available for sale, and that is just the greatest tragedy. But it does seem like Boris Johnson pioneered the EU are gonna straighten the bananas stories. Also, prawn cocktail crisps are bad. Hate to break it to you. Also, this I don't want to lean into any kind of thing here, but this made me just kind of laugh about what Boris Johnson's did at his job. Johnson told the Telegraph readers that Brussels posed a threat to British pink sausages. Okay. That it wanted to standardise condom sizes because Italians had smaller penises, which again is anti-Italian discrimination that I will not stand for on this stream. We are not standing for anti-Italian discrimination. In fact, the EU was concerned about the safety of condoms, not their size, and the work had been carried out by the European Committee for Standardisation, which is not even part of the EU. Again, want to point out to Peter Oborne that fact-checking is not the route to victory, but thank you for telling me that Boris Johnson wrote about Italian penis sizes. I am delighted by that. That will bring me joy for a long time. Hey, thank you for the subscription at Tier 1. You have subscribed for 2 months. That is a lot of months. Well, it's a lot more than I usually expect from people. But I need to design the year badge. I think I'm gonna make a golden Tonti badge for the year. Anyway, not Tonti badge, Tonti statue badge. There you go. So, Boris Johnson again telling the lies here, where he assured the person who ran the Spectator that he would never become an MP while Spectator editor. Of course, famously, he then became Tory MP for Henley. Quite a uniquely cursed place near my hometown. And of course, The Guardian calling things wrong as always. Once Boris Johnson was sacked by the Tory leader, Michael Howard, The Guardian announced an end to an unlikely but uniquely engaging political career. So, Boris Johnson, The Guardian, I feel like we can blame The Guardian for this. Yes, terrorites. Well, we don't think we're going to get much ideology at play here. But the Guardian's verdict, while understandable, was premature. 15 years later, Boris Johnson, who'd been sacked for lying by both the Times and the Tory party, became Prime Minister. He had been elected by a majority of Tory MPs and was powerfully endorsed by the Times. Almost as if there's something else at play. What could it be? I don't know, to be honest with you. So there is a section here about what Boris Johnson owes to Hunter S. Thompson. There wasn't much to highlight here. he just repeats the phrase "first Gonzo Prime Minister" a few times, which I quite enjoy. There wasn't anything that I found particularly disagreeable. Just a couple of... There's a Norwell quote in there, but that is, I think, not as upsetting as some of the other ones. So, he's going to do a comparison between Boris Johnson and Donald Trump's rise to power. He talks about how much of a fucking loser Trump is, because I'm going to read this out. Trump actually inherited tens of millions from his father, who also bailed him out when he got into trouble. Massive fucking loser is Boris Trump. Not Boris Trump, that's a fucking cursed character I've just invented. Donald Trump. He held... Trump, of course, they talk about the art of the deal here. He held a quality which he called truthful hyperbole, which said Trump plays into people's fantasies. He has just described politics there, and that pretty handily explains why Donald Trump transitioned so smoothly into politics, admittedly. You should only get one Orwell quote, and that's me being generous, right? Like, you should only really have one. Two just feels like you've run out of ideas and you've not read many sources, which I know is not the case here. There's just an interesting quote here about how Trump's career as a reality star basically gave him the platform to launch at the White House. Johnson also similarly a media creation in that way. That one quote should always be about him being a snitch. If I ever write a book, you know. Okay, so here we go. It's the Christian democracy stuff, everyone. Buckle up. Chapter 5, The Candor of Angela Merkel. I'm gonna read this quote for Angela Merkel. This is a quote that he felt was worthy to be with the chapter title. Okay, well, everyone who likes prawn cocktail crisps, I mean, if you have a lot to answer for. Anyway, I will read this quote from Angela Merkel. The pandemic cannot be fought with lies and disinformation, and neither can it be with hatred and agitation. Fact-denying populism is being shown its limits. In a democracy, facts and transparency are needed. Yes, that is correct. The take in the chat about Tato is pretty much bang on. He describes Boris Johnson and Donald Trump here as they don't possess the moral seriousness to cope with a public health catastrophe like coronavirus. That's true. Indeed, both men were slow to grasp that a problem existed at all. My note here is, and this goes back to, do we talk about ideology in this book, is I think the problem wasn't just that they were bumbling assholes, it's that they were operating in an ideological way, in Boris Johnson's case, in favour of... I've just completely lost my train of thought there for what the thing is. Retail landlords. There you go. Retail landlords. Commercial landlords. Fuck. There it is. We got there, everyone. And he declines to make that analysis. And I don't know whether this is one of those things where he lies by omission or not, but it is very much... And he does this thing where he's like, yes, Donald Trump and Boris Johnson, same category, but Donald Trump worse. Yeah, exactly. Like, I found his choice of country he made for, I think, ideological reasons, strangely, even though he declines to talk about it, but we'll get to my note on that later. He talks about the report that ranked countries on pandemic readiness. Now, if you saw this map, it was basically a map of global north versus global south. It was a map that decided not to actually take into account any country's established state capacity. Peter Oborne here describes the United States and Britain are advanced nations with decent infrastructure. I don't know why I did like a British Puffer voice for that, but nevertheless, citation needed on the decent infrastructure. Famed scientists, expertise, and financial muscle. Certainly true, I think, those last 2 points. South Korea and Taiwan always get forgotten. Vietnam, forgotten. He does mention New Zealand, but he discounts that as a fit comparison, because New Zealand has Well, he'll describe in fact, he describes it right here on the next page. Perhaps New Zealand, with its small, isolated population in a remote part of the world, counts as a special case. Fine, I can kind of accept that. I can accept why he would come up with that. I don't think that it's impossible to make comparisons, but I will accept his premise here for the sake of continuing. The same cannot be said of Germany, which was confronted with its first case of the pandemic at almost exactly the same time as Britain. And so I speculate here that he is not picking Vietnam, Taiwan, South Korea. He's certainly not picking Vietnam and is picking Germany instead because he thinks that the UK and Germany are comparable liberal democracies that had similar conditions going into the pandemic. And I'm not going to criticize him too much for that because he's not arguing for an alternative to liberal democracy. He's just trying to argue within the confines of his own ideology, which, fine, he's entitled to do that, but I certainly think that there's maybe more to learn from the case of Vietnam than there is from the case of Germany. But maybe we can't transfer those lessons, and that's fair enough. And this is the thing. He talks here about Angela Merkel being straight with the German people. Like, there's a lot of personal praise for Angela Merkel here that makes me think he's not really doing a worthwhile analysis of pandemic responses. I mean, it matters, right? Boris Johnson being Prime Minister matters. I will admit that, but I'm unconvinced. I'm unconvinced that this is a very good... there's no real analysis outside the West. Again, there are a lot of reasons why that's the case. I think his feeling is that Vietnam is not a liberal democracy and not comparable, and I think he probably does not pay attention to Taiwan or South Korea. For what reason? I mean, Eurocentrism, probably, but we're all guilty of a little Eurocentrism, I think. But worth noting, he talks here about the various fuck-ups and lies that have occurred. I mean, the UK's coronavirus record is abysmal. You know, there was the missing the deadline for a joint EU ventilator procurement scheme. It didn't do the track and trace app. He does a fairly good job of just sort of detailing the fuck-ups at play. So he handily, for me, gives a fantastic example of why Prime Minister's Questions is fucking bullshit. Alright, I'm gonna read. He talks about the care home fuck-up, where people were discharged from hospitals into care homes without testing. Yes, people outside the UK, that is a thing that happened, and it was a fucking disaster, as anyone could have told you. I'm pretty sure pretty much all of us said it at the time. Alright, let's go. Let's talk about PMQs. So, I'm going to continue from this paragraph here. Meanwhile, in Britain, many patients were discharged from hospital and sent to homes for the elderly and vulnerable without being tested, as we established a complete, massive fucking disaster. There is also plenty of testimony that the government failed to provide adequate protective equipment. I'm doing the British Puffer voice again. I'm so sorry. So it was no surprise when newly elected Labour leader Keir Starmer, let's get some Keir hams going in the chat for our boy here, because, you know, this is a rare, actually quite a good question, but it highlights why it's all fucking nonsense. Keir Starmer raised the issue of government guidance for care homes in the Commons. He said, earlier this year, and until the 12th of March, the government's own official advice was, and I'm quoting from it, it remains very unlikely that people receiving care in a care home will become infected. Now, we're going to move to Boris Johnson. Johnson immediately responded, It isn't true that the advice said that. That became a bit... I didn't quite get it. Johnson was wrong. The guidance published on the 25th of February states that it was very unlikely people receiving care in care homes or the community would be infected with the new coronavirus. This advice was withdrawn on the 13th of March and replaced with new guidance about what to do in the event of an outbreak at a care home or other supported living. Starmer has since asked Johnson to return to the House to correct the record. The Prime Minister has failed to do so. I would say the Prime Minister has declined to do so because the Prime Minister is fully aware that Prime Minister's questions doesn't fucking matter beyond the news clips. And he got his fucking news clip out of that. I hate to break it to people like PMQs. I say this, I do occasionally go on stream and talk about PMQs. So, and I just made the note here. By far the most negligent decision of the government was to allow people discharged from hospital back into care. Absolutely, categorically ridiculous decision. I can't believe that I can't believe that happened. To be honest, there are so many, there are so many things that happened during this pandemic that we're going to need to actually process once we're in a better place than this, trapped in our little flats. I'm touching both walls of my flat right now. Quote here. What did I make? What was my note here? Because it's better not been. Okay. So, the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee's report into the government policy on care homes could hardly have been more damning. Oh, let's see what it said. It called the decision to discharge 25,000 patients from hospitals into social care without first testing them a reckless and appalling error. The government had taken no responsibility, and to this day it tries to blame others on the basis of false and misleading statements. And doesn't this tell us something, right? Doesn't this tell us that the parliamentary structure is unfit for holding these people to account? And doesn't that tell us that we shouldn't pay as much attention to it as, the report was damning, but if those are the two quotes that he picked out that were damning, this is what was damning, right? They said it was reckless and appalling error. It was a reckless and appalling error. I mean, it was a complete clusterfuck. You can't write that in an official report, but I can say it on the stream. And why, anyway, I'm gonna move on. Peter Oborne, it's not a bad book. I will say this. A lot of this is fine. It's just that there are bits of it that aren't fine. And we move to chapter 6. So chapter 6 is how to destroy a country. And in fairness, the country was already in pretty bad shape. So I don't think this one is entirely on the current Prime Minister. And he describes here that criminal negligence, certainly. While there is no doubt that Johnson is both deceitful and amoral, the Prime Minister's war on truth is part of a wider attack on the pillars of British democracy: Parliament, the rule of law, and the civil service. I mean, I don't even know where to fucking begin with this. Alright, first of all, the rule of law is just a nebulous concept here. I don't think I think that there have been a lot of governments that have been above the rule of law for quite a fucking while. Parliament, I got news for Peter Oborne. Lots of countries have parliaments that aren't really particularly democratic. And arguably the UK may well have joined one of those, that group of countries. The civil service as a pillar of British democracy. I mean, the civil service, and yes, you need bureaucrats, administrators, so on. They are not elected or democratically accountable. They're not. That's not me being horrible about civil servants. It's true. That's part of the function of the civil servant, right? But, if those are your pillars of British democracy, I have questions. I have a lot of questions. Civil service stands out. At least Parliament, you can, in theory, kick your MP out at the next election, right? You could very well do that. I don't know that it's a particularly easy task, but you can do it, right? Rule of law, I mean, governments get taken to court, they can usually just ignore the court ruling. Civil service, really weird, and it stands out. And so he describes the reason for the attack, right? And this is by far the peak. It's impartiality bullshit. Yes, it is. It is exactly that. And there is a bit later, if we have time, I would like to get to it and talk about it. But so he says, there is a reason for this. Truth and liberal democracy are intertwined. To make rulers accountable to the people, the latter needs access to objective truth. When truth is defined by rulers themselves, the people lose all ability to pass judgment on them. Alright, I'll be fair to Peter Oborne. Internally consistent. I'm going to be fair and say internally consistent, way too fucking lib-brained for me. The idea of truth and liberal democracy being necessarily intertwined is interesting given the results that liberal democracies throw up, right? And what liberal democratic governments do, right? I don't, and have done historically. If Peter Oborne's contention is that truth is a fundamental part of liberal democracy, he must then think the US has never been a liberal democracy. Because that is a government that has consistently operated on lies and propaganda, and I bet if I asked Peter Oborne, he would say, no, of course America in the 50s, 60s, 70s, so on, was a liberal democracy. How could you say it's not? But by his fucking definition of it, and his understanding of what the necessary components are, it wasn't. Anyway, yeah, there's no analysis of imperialism. Yes, like, and I didn't expect, and to be fair to Peter Oborne again, I didn't expect it from him, right? I didn't expect Peter Oborne, One Nation Tory, voted Tory until 2019, to be like, well, you know, let's talk about imperialism and the way that that factors into liberal democracy and even social democracy, and how, you know, these systems and structures are built on wealth taken through imperialism. Like, I don't expect that from him, of course not, but like, it is a glaring omission. There are a lot of glaring omissions here. So, he says here that the Johnson government is not totalitarian, and I have thoughts on this, which is, does Peter Oborne consider the AKP government in Turkey not totalitarian? And if he does consider it totalitarian, why isn't Johnson? Why is Johnson not but Erdogan is, when they both do basically the same things? How are they meaningfully different from each other? There's an interesting question. I would love to hear an answer from him at some point. Dominic, he talks about Dominic Cummings editing his own blog. That was quite funny. I thought, I mean, obviously you shouldn't lie, but as a point of principle, it was pretty funny that he edited his blog. It was like, no, I said it a year ago, don't worry. And it still said, like, edited the day before on it. Which really tells me, get Oborne on the stream. I mean, it's not impossible. You get me those numbers, folks, as you've been doing recently. I mean, we could talk about it. Okay. Truthlessness matters for the same reason in the civil service. Okay, let's go. We're talking about the civil service. Officials are employed to give fair and scrupulous advice to ministers. Again, highly theoretical. I know civil servants. I mean, you know, that is a thing. Without that advice, governments become easy prey for cronyism and special interests. And guys, could you imagine a British government that had fallen prey to cronyism and special interests? Could you imagine? Oh, man. I mean, where have we ever heard of that before? Fucking hell. I mean, I'm being horrible here, but, like, he knows. He knows for a fact that that's ridiculous. He does know. So he talks about the case. So he talks about moments where ministers, secretaries of state and ministers have resigned before they were pushed, basically, or resigned with, you know, and the leader has attempted not to just not let them resign. And he talks about an example here in 2002, Estelle Morris. Morris had promised to step down if targets for exam results were not met. They weren't met. She writes the resignation letter, and in the resignation letter she writes, and I feel, imagine writing this about yourself. I can't imagine being the kind of person who'd write this about themselves. I have learned what I am good at, and also what I am less good at. I am good at dealing with the issues and in communicating to the teaching profession. I am less good at strategic management of a huge department, and I am not good at dealing with the modern media. I mean, in fairness, no one's good at dealing with the modern media. I can kind of forgive that one. And he goes on to say there was a basic decency at work here. Ministers took credit they did not always deserve for work by civil servants, so they should take the blame as well. I mean, feels like a horrible system to me. Morris didn't feel that she was competent at her job, and her sense of public duty compelled her to say so. Her resignation was honourable, though not so widely remembered as Carrington's. You referred to that particular resignation earlier. And I'm just fucking confused by the idea that someone would resign. This is how, and this kind of maybe illustrates Peter Oborne's point. I'm just kind of dumbfounded by the idea that you'd resign simply for not being particularly competent. Like, I thought that was a prerequisite to be in government these days, but like, wow. Just something to think about, maybe. And actually one of the better bits in his book, though I don't like him constantly saying that Tories did honourable resignations. The only good Tory is one outside of Parliament, and even then they're not particularly good. Yeah, so he talks about attacks on the civil service, which he cites as particularly bad and cowardly because civil servants can't publicly respond, of course, because they would be sacked immediately with cause. So, yeah. And he talks about how the UK does not rely, as the US system does, on formal checks and balances to guarantee integrity and rooting out wrongdoing. It depends on informal conventions, especially a system of sharply defined dividing lines between ministers and officials. And, the thing about writing that sentence is, okay, you've written that. Maybe it's true, right? Maybe it is true. Maybe he's right. Why does he think that's good? Why does he think that's a robust system? I read it as it was written, right? I described the system to you. Abstract that system. Abstract this from the UK, right? It depends on informal conventions, especially a system of sharply defined dividing lines between ministers and officials. Does that sound like a particularly good system to you, yes or no? Arguably no, right? More no than yes, for sure. And he talks here about, I'm going to lose my mind at this point, but he says, this is important in Britain because, he talks about impartiality here, because unlike in the US, the machinery of state is supposed to be neutral. And neutrality is not a fucking thing. Neutrality is not a fucking thing. It's not a thing. It doesn't exist. It's not real. It's not real, especially in the context of executing government policy. It is not real. Neutrality can't exist. At least if, as he's described the American system here, it being partisan is at least it being a bit more honest, maybe. But, that is not how it works, at all. Ideology klaxon, yes. He talks about the destruction of the public domain here, and he's like, curiously enough, although the far left of the Labour Party has regularly fulminated against the alleged bias of top civil servants and threatened to replace them with ideological sympathisers, it is the right wing of the Tory party which has done far more to achieve this. And if I had to be honest with you, I am kind of jealous that they are getting to do it, because that would feel good. It may not be necessarily productive, it may lead to administrative problems for a few years, but it would feel good to do. And so I am, if nothing else, a bit jealous of it. Alright, so here he talks about the press basically joining in on Boris Johnson's particular targets, within the civil service, and the press basically briefing against them, against the civil servants, of course, not against the government. That would be ridiculous. And previous prime ministers have taken against senior civil servants, but never in such speed or on a scale, nor accompanied by such merciless briefing. But doesn't this tell us something? Doesn't the fact that Boris Johnson felt he could brief against the senior civil servants in this apparently unique way, according to Peter Oborne, does that tell us something, or does it not tell us something? Because he declines to tell us what that might mean. I'll tell you what it means. It means the press are definitely in lockstep, or at least the legacy press are in lockstep with the Tory government. He talks about the Victorians, the Victorian grandees who basically formed the modern British state. They eradicated ancient ties of connection, nepotism, and family within the civil service. I'm going to need a citation needed on that one, because boy, is that not a lot of people's experience with that. He talks here, again, about one of these boring parliamentary committees that are like, Boris Johnson did this thing that was wrong. And I'm like, yes, but what the fuck happened? Like, you didn't what did they do? They didn't fucking do anything, did they? And, what difference did it make to his rise to power? I don't know. Did it make any difference to his rise to power? I don't know. I couldn't possibly tell you. Principles in public life is the next section. So, he talks about... Okay, so there's a specific example here that he uses. He talks about the John Major government post-92, which was pretty scandal-ridden, is the politest way I could possibly describe this. That government. So he had the arms to Iraq affair. So for those of us who are around my age, will not remember this because it was before, I think a bit before we were born, or certainly before we were thinking about stuff. No, not pegging. No. Yeah, terrorites. Yes. Yes, that is correct. So basically, what had happened was Britain sold arms to Iraq, Saddam Hussein's Iraq. I will point out. Illegally. They broke the law. They were not meant to do it. And that might remind you of certain recent incidents, but the fallout from Clark's remarks, and they lied about not doing it, basically. It emerged that in his eagerness to sell arms to Saddam Hussein, the Thatcher government had breached official guidelines. So this was unfortunate for John Major in the sense that it wasn't really him who did it, but, he was holding the hot potato of the Tory government at the time. So, classic UK, this kind of implies that a lot of the shenanigans of Johnson's government aren't new. Like, he writes this example out, and it's a really good example of corruption and lying and bad governance and bad practice, right? It's a really good example, and it's one that a lot of people maybe won't remember. Or maybe they will if they were old enough. I'm, again, 27. So maybe that's why I don't remember it particularly well. But doesn't this imply that the problems he's talking about have always existed in some form? And that Johnson is just... The problem with Johnson is he's not hiding it. He's not trying to hide it. He's just fucking doing it. Isn't that what it feels like his problem is? And, yeah, I wrote the note, he's remembering the response, not the action. Yeah, perhaps. I basically did the note here. Mods. The Nolan principles are almost scriptural in their simplicity. It's heartbreaking to read them today. Not one of them is being observed, and there is no serious attempt to enforce them. Breaking them carries no consequences, and my note here is mods. But yeah, chapter 7 is the failure of the British press. At last we're at the good stuff. He opens with a quote from Winston Churchill, not particularly interested in that. British newspapers have played a critical role in the production, authentication, dissemination, and most important of all, the normalization of lies, fabrications, and smears issued by the Johnson political machine. Great, correct. We're off to a strong start in this chapter. Johnson's government was a media class government. Correct. Good observation. This is exactly why they went even easier on him than on Theresa May. Fleet Street decided that Johnson's lying was of little interest to readers. I'm glad he makes the point that it was a decision. It was an active decision. And as I said earlier, it's because a lot of these journalists think that his career is the ideal outcome for a journalistic career. Boris is the first Telegraph journalist since Sir Winston Churchill to lead the country. Again, good of the Telegraph to keep the 100% record of racist UK prime ministers. Glad they got to keep the unbeaten record there. The open support offered by British newspapers for Johnson was, of course, welcome. Far more important was their collective decision to turn a blind eye to stories that would damage the Prime Minister. For example, the mainstream press paid almost no attention to Johnson's habitual lying, in sharp contrast to their treatment of Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, who was subject to constant attack. Yep. Does this tell us something, Peter, though? This is the problem. Does this tell us something? Is there something... is there something about these papers? Is there something about who owns these papers? Is there something about who becomes the journalists that means that this is more likely? I don't know. I can't tell you from reading the book whether that's the case. I can tell you from other places that why this is the case. But anyway. Okay, this marked a sharp breach from the textbook theory that the media plays an important cleansing role in holding power to account, uncovering corruption, lying, and deceit. Again, does this tell us something? I'm really, frustrated here. Because... And does this tell us that, the UK is a liberal democracy does that mean your liberal democracy comparisons are maybe less useful to us? I don't know. He makes the point here, and I think it's a very good point, and it's I will write this. I will read this out for you all. Had Corbyn been sacked twice for lying, newspaper readers would never have heard the end of it, and rightly so. The past is the best guide to the future. If a man steals from his employers, he is likely to do so again. If he lies to them, he will most likely do so again. The mainstream British press bears a heavy culpability for the inexorable rise of Boris Johnson. Correct. Good. Okay. Fine. And he basically describes here the debriefing operation against Philip Hammond when they were talking about the Yellowhammer document that was leaked. And they were talking about senior number 10 sources, saying that like it was an old document, even though the document was made after Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. Fine. This is a good example of how the operation worked. And especially because literally no former minister could have been the leaker. We know that for a fact. And he describes here that there is an implicit deal between the British press and the government of the day, in this case the Tory government, in return for access and information, much of it false. The political media was reporting a pro-government narrative. But yes, okay, fine. But like, has this changed? What's changed? Did this not exist under Theresa May? I feel like it existed under Theresa May. Did this not exist under David Cameron? I'm reasonably sure it did. And hell, if we want to extend it into the territory that Peter Oborne feels much more comfortable making structural analysis in, did it not happen under Gordon Brown and Tony Blair? Reasonably sure it did, right? And even John Major Thatcher. I feel like there's always access matters, right? It's access journalism. In America they call it access journalism. It's client journalism, what he's trying to describe here, but he doesn't say it in the plain terms. And yeah, says here, this means that Johnson's Downing Street can malign political opponents, lie about them and get away with it, but it can only do this because political journalists and editors allow it to. And my question here is, what is it about these characters that mean they allow them to do it? Is it that the press as an institution has a particular structural bias that means certain individuals who are less likely to prevent this from happening get jobs in certain legacy institutions? Or is it something else? I don't know. I can't tell you. I can't tell you what the causal link here is. And he talks about Nick Robinson asking Boris Johnson about an investigation into the Dominic Grieve, Oliver Letwing, Hilary Benn bill that was, the one that they said was written by the EU, even though it wasn't. That was obvious bullshit. And he says here, but Robinson didn't ask the important question. Was there an investigation at all? And again, why did he not ask the question? Tell me why he didn't ask the question. I'm going to sort of power through these last few bits, even though this is probably the most interesting bit. He describes the political editor behind the Mail on Sunday as a senior and respected journalist. He certainly shouldn't be respected if he works for the Mail on Sunday. No one who's worked for them should be respected by anyone watching this stream. At least not for their journalism, certainly. Yeah, so he talks here about his difficulty. So he's writing a thing about this incident where it's blatantly obvious that Johnson has fucked it, because Peter Oborne calls sources. They say to him, well, there wasn't a fucking investigation, but people insist that one, Boris Johnson had sort of given legitimacy to the story by saying there were legitimate questions, and two, number 10 sources had said that there was an investigation. And he talks about the difficulties he had trying to get this published somewhere. He offered the piece to the Daily Mail. Unsurprisingly, he was going to write it for his column, but his editor basically was like, please write something else. And he then says he did, which does not paint him in a particularly good light, if I had to be honest with you. He then offers the piece to, get this, The Spectator, and the editor explained basically that they have inside sources. That means that we can't publish this, and because it would invite charges of hypocrisy. Famously, The Spectator cares about being called a hypocrite. He then tries to pitch this to Channel 4. It gets fucked up at some point, Then he asked the TV production company to approach the BBC, and they get told there's no way the BBC would be interested in this. Wonder why? Could we possibly tell? And he says here that the media would not have taken this particular role that they did with Johnson for Theresa May. But I'm convinced that had Theresa May wanted to pursue this brand of politics, I don't think she could have carried it very well, admittedly, but that's a different question. She would have been allowed to do it by the press. And obviously he makes the very obvious point that if this was Jeremy Corbyn, it would never happen. It would never be allowed under any circumstances. And now he's talking about how he is essentially barred from the mainstream press. And he writes very occasionally now, which is something of a shame, perhaps. But no. You know, and he talks, chapter 8 is the capture of the Conservative Party. He talks about Boris Johnson's Spectator here. His Spectator stood for honest politics, for the honest politics which he now subverts. And I will point out for the chat that Boris Johnson was editor of The Spectator when it ran Eurabia covers. So I wouldn't get too sentimental about whatever the fuck The Spectator was up to back then, if I had to be honest with you. And he talks about, you know, Boris Johnson winning in a traditionally Labour voting city, which again, I would need a bit more evidence to go off for that, because I'm reasonably sure that hasn't always been the case. Certainly not to the point we could say traditionally Labour voting, but okay. Meant that Tories would just, you know, let that slide. They'd let it fucking slide. And yeah, he talks here about basically how owned the Tory party are, because for each member in 2015, there had been 28 in 1950. I mean, is there a question to be asked here? Perhaps. Okay, so to be fair, neither David Cameron nor Boris Johnson started this. Politics was hollowing out before either arrived on the scene, nor was it a uniquely Conservative phenomenon. New Labour did the same thing, and for similar reasons, deliberately using business owners to marginalise the trade unions. But this sombre background does explain why a degraded Conservative Party was so vulnerable for takeover. And just extend the thought a little bit, like a little bit more. You're almost there with that one. But he also talks about the editor. He was the editor of The Spectator 15 years ago. The magazine he edited was the embodiment of traditional conservatism. And my note here is that in that it was incredibly racist. Yes, he is correct. That does embody traditional conservatism. So he's accidentally correct. And chapter 9 is the conclusion, which we will power through quite quickly. He asks the question, what happened to the British? How on earth did we vote for him? And my answer is that nothing happened. Nothing happened. And then he talks about Johnson having the good luck to be faced by Jeremy Corbyn in a general election gifted to him by Corbyn's decision to allow him to hold it at all. I will point out that was the Lib Dems and the SNP's fault for indicating they would vote for an election. There was literally nothing Corbyn could have done to prevent that election from happening. So, incorrectly laying the blame at Jeremy Corbyn's feet there. Also declined to do media analysis on why Jeremy Corbyn might have been a figure Boris Johnson was lucky to run against. Minor quibble in the context of the entire thing. He talks here about why Angela Merkel is a serious person running a serious country. She had to be, having been raised in hardline communist state where words and actions had to be measured with intense care. Students of her career also point to her scientific background as the key to her success. So according to Peter Oborne, and you heard it here first, I should be the fucking Prime Minister of the UK because I would do it fantastically because of my scientific background. You heard it here first. Let's get that campaign rolling. But he's doing stem brain here. He's doing stem brain by proxy. Not a fan of it. That is not why Angela Merkel is a successful politician, an electoral politician. She's not a very good politician, although she does better policies than a lot of Labour rightists. Otherwise, I think we don't have any more notes here. Oh, we do. We have the How to Fight Back section. He's spoken to the manager of democracy. I'm going to read this one thing out and then we're going to wrap it up. So here are some ways we can all fight back against it. 1. Parliament must once again take lying seriously. I am sending this book to the Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, and to the Lord Speaker, Norman Fowler. I will encourage both to take action against any government statements which mislead their respective houses, and in particular to demand that these be corrected within 1 week by a written ministerial statement in their respective Hansards, within a special space for ministerial corrections. Sometimes statements made in good faith are corrected on the basis of more up-to-date information. That would be shown on the minister's correction. He has written to the manager of democracy. And that is, just such a perfect summary of this entire thing. And so much of this final, his How to Fight Back, I've got bad news, relies on structures that are not going to do anything about it, to basically sum it up. But he has become the Karen of parliamentary democracy. That is what's happened. I don't know how to summarize it. It's not a bad book. As much as, like, most of my comments were like, I don't like this book for this reason or that reason. It's a fine book. It's not like, it wasn't painful to read. It was just, there's omissions that are glaring. And not to say that he lied by omission, of course, but you might well think that. Because I think he knows about the things that I was pointing out. I think he's more than aware of them. But that is the review. Hope you've all enjoyed it. If you're new here and you don't have a ridiculous name and you're not going to troll the chat, please do follow. I would appreciate a follow. And subscribe if you've really enjoyed it. And otherwise, I think maybe he's lying to himself more than anything. Yeah, possibly. Oh, you're doing banter time. All right, hold on. If we're doing banter time, are you live? We are going to raid Mirrors. There you go. Okay, so, everyone, remember to catch me tomorrow from 6 p.m. We're doing the finale of Thick Bohemia with Dr. Eleanor, of TV fame, Dr. Eleanor Janega. So, of TV fame, she's coming back, and that's going to be the finale of Thick Bohemia. But don't worry, we will be doing another campaign. But otherwise, it's good night from me. Take it easy, everyone. And good night, and see you tomorrow.